Welcome to Not Just Money with your hosts, Doretta and Li. This isn't your typical podcast about finances. It's a podcast about all the money conversations we aren't having, sometimes not even with ourselves. Join us on this journey of hard truths, lived experience, and the wisdom that comes from both. Because money is never just about money.
Hey Lee, how you surviving the heat?
I am staying out of it. Oh, how was your little trip to Winnipeg this summer?
It was lovely. It was really hot,
Aw.
and one night we had a really major storm overnight, but it was beautiful. The parks there are so lovely. We went to the Assiniboine Park, just
Mm-hmm.
gorgeous. And it just has such a good energy. And even like you and I always found in our annual February trips, Winnipeg is so friendly. I really get why Winnipeggers love that city so much.
La vie en rose, maybe. And I also think you were caught up in a little bit of a love bubble.
Maybe. Visiting my son and his bride to be in 3 weeks before the wedding did have a little bit of that effect. And I got to go to a bridal salon, which I haven't done since my daughter got married.
How apropos, seeing that it is wedding season, and today we're talking about weddings.
Gee, what a coincidence.
We were always going to have to talk about weddings at some point, and there's nothing like a wedding in the family to bring it into focus. Not to mention, last weekend also saw, what do they call it? The wedding of the century at Madison Square Gardens?
I saw the funniest description about that somewhere. They called it the American marriage of the century, soon to be followed by the photo reveal of the millennium, and then the divorce album of all human existence.
Aw, that's mean. Sorry, Swifties.
I thought it was funny.
Of course you did.
Anyway, before we talk about weddings, I do want to add a little bit of a caveat here. We're going to be talking about weddings, but our primary focus is not going to be on budgeting or cost cutting. We'll talk a little bit about a framework for that, but like our travel episode, we're going to go deeper, explore purpose and expectations and philosophies.
Because that's what we do. Weddings, like life, are never just about money.
They are also about money.
Yes, lots of
Weddings,
money.
lots of money. Weddings are a business. They're a big business, like a $5 billion a year business in Canada just for weddings. That does not include engagement rings or honeymoons. They don't call it the wedding industrial complex for nothing.
I know, but 5 billion a year? I don't know how I actually feel about that number. Is it big or did I expect bigger? If what shows up on my feeds is anything to go by, weddings seem to hover around extremes. Either it's super luxury or super low key.
Interesting. There are about 150,000 weddings a year in Canada. Dipped a lot during COVID, of course. I actually know one young couple who had to delay their wedding twice, but it's pretty much rebounded to that same level.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I did the opposite of what most people do. I had the kid first, and then with COVID, we just did a simple quote unquote wedding. We wouldn't have had any guests at all if it weren't some of my friends who invited themselves, literally. Then again, post COVID, we also went to Europe 3 times for different weddings. So, like I said, there's this weird separation.
I think the whole COVID thing was really sad. I really do. For people who wanted that special time with their loved ones all around them. But I suspect, as you're saying, that the period immediately after
Mm.
lockdowns probably rebounded with a vengeance like all other consumer spending.
Or revenge spending, anybody?
Yeah, exactly. And do you know how much people spend on weddings?
5 billion. But on that point, I don't know. I was that kid that thought I'd have the big wedding, but then getting to it, I was like, nah, I'm good. I spend almost nothing. Though to be fair, I'm not sure it even counts as a wedding. My officiant was my yoga instructor, and then I had witnesses plus a couple of party crashers. You know who you are. We just signed the paperwork in my living room. It looked nice. I got some flowers.
You didn't even tell me for months or maybe for years. I still don't even know when it happened. And it's not like we don't talk or text every day either. I did figure it out. I did notice that you started gradually referring to your partner as your husband.
It was just paperwork. And I actually remember the moment when I let it slip, and you're like, "What do you mean, husband?" But let's not get too dramatic, okay? It was not years. I didn't invite my own brother. And maybe one day I'll have a more typical wedding or whatever you want to call it. What is time but a construct of the mind?
I am just kidding. I get it. You do you. But marriage and weddings, not the same thing. One is a commitment, and the other is the public declaration and the surrounding ritual. And some people choose to do the former without the latter, and the marriage without the ritual, which is great. That's what you want. But what we're going to be talking about here is all the expenses that go along with the ritual that is the wedding. And the average cost of a wedding in Canada today is, you ready for it?
Ready.
30 to $40,000. Though remember, average costs get really skewed by small percentages of crazy over the top weddings that cost $100,000 and up. I did try to find the mean, but the truth is we just don't know.
But couldn't it also be skewed the other way, like with home weddings, like mine? I am pretty sure it cost me $500. My husband 3D printed our rings and then he would cast them later. And I wore a dress I already had. But you know what you always say about averages?
Yep, no much better than guesswork. But I'll tell you something interesting. There is actually a correlation between the cost of the wedding and your likelihood of divorce. And marketing might suggest that the more you spend, the bigger the commitment. But that is not what the numbers show.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yep. There's a famous study done about 10 years ago that showed that couples who spent more on weddings and engagement rings tend to have higher divorce rates, even after they accounted for factors like age and education and income. And there have been other similar studies done since then, and they've all found the same thing. Now, of course, this is correlation, not causation.
Yeah, we do know that financial conflict is one of the strongest predictors of marital distress and failure. I have to wonder how many people who blow a bundle on the wedding are actually starting out their marriage under maybe financial strain. And we know that is one of the biggest predictors of marriage failure.
Exactly. But anyway, here's how wedding costs typically break down. Venue and catering, 40 to 50% of the budget. Photography and videography at 10 to 15%. Bridal attire and formal wear, 8 to 10%. Flowers and decor, 8 to 10%. And entertainment, 5 to 10%.
Actually, that's really helpful. So, for
Yeah.
those of you planning a wedding, here's a budget framework. But seriously, 30 to 40,000 is a lot. But I can't say it surprises me, and I've been personally to some pretty extravagant weddings that I know were well over 120,000, and this is probably 10 years ago, so way more today. And also a whole bunch of destination weddings.
Now, I actually tried to get a handle on the destination wedding market, but there aren't any hard numbers. The estimate is about 20% of Canadian weddings are destination weddings, average size 40 people. It's actually, interestingly, a cheaper choice for the bride and groom, about
Hmm.
18 to $20,000, but the guests spend
Mm.
between 72 and $100,000 in aggregate, of course, mostly on travel, usually a week at an all-inclusive.
And when you say 72, you mean 72,000.
Yes,
to a hundred
yes.
thousand, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
72,000 to 100,000. Yep.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, especially it's the summer travel months, the worst. I remember spending almost 10,000 just on flights because you're traveling to high traffic destinations, right? So been there, done that. Okay. The numbers are interesting, but I think that's only the landscape. I think the whys are where we need to go. Really, people, why are you spending $30 to $40,000 to mark this particular milestone in your life? I think all the cultural expectations around weddings need to be challenged. Why are we doing this? Why do we think this is important? You can buy a nice car or invest in education or your first time homebuyers fund.
So I agree that why are we doing this is absolutely the question. And we'll get there. But I think there are actually a few other dimensions of the landscape that we need to pay attention to first. Things that shape expectations and decisions in a lot of ways. It's not just money, remember. And I think that a lot of the things that have become cultural expectations actually have really shallow roots. So maybe challenging them doesn't have to require all the drama that some people might expect. Honestly, sometimes I think we just create our own problems.
Yeah, and like you always pointed out before too, that our living memory is quite short. In the last couple episodes, we talked about just when certain traditions started, and you think, oh, it hasn't even been 100 years, and now that's a thing. Let's dig into that. What do you mean in that wedding sense?
It's actually more of the same in terms of how long these traditions have been around. Marriage, weddings, not the same thing as we've already said. They are not just personal events, okay? They never has been just personal events. They've always had, in every culture, a really important purpose. Marriage is that long-term commitment between two people. The wedding is the ritual that publicly marks the beginning or the formal public recognition of that commitment. But I'd argue that over the last generation or two, starting with Gen X and full flood by the time we get to millennials, we've been in this really profound transitional period for both marriage and the weddings that mark them. It's been this crazy dramatic period of change in what they mean and who they're important to and why. I It's like we're caught in this strange liminal space between the pressures of customs and expectations on one hand and the reality of life in the 21st century on the other.
Why sense a rabbit hole coming on?
Always. But seriously, we need to understand where we came from if we're going to understand where we are and where we're going and why we feel compelled to make certain decisions. Just to use a simple example, the average wedding dress today costs $1,500 to $2,500. A fancy one can go from $10,000 to the moon. Why? What are the emotional and cultural and especially the psychological forces that shape our decision to spend that kind of money on a dress to wear for a few hours? And listen, I get the dream dress thing. I do. No judgment here.
Maybe on your side, there's a little judgment over here. If you're going into debt for it, or you have better uses or other purposes for your money, you're making a choice, right? Let's not lie about that. You're making a choice, and in this case, I'm sorry, it's not a very good one. Like you said, you get what, one wear out of it? Like, where are you gonna go with a $10,000 wedding dress? Because that should be fancy. And it's not like you can wear your wedding dress to somebody else's party. That's clearly noticeable. So I don't really think that's great value for money. $10,000 is a lot. $2,500 is a lot.
And you get the brides that do the destroy the dress after the wedding. That I find so deeply offensive. But anyway, sorry, I did say no judgment, no judgment. All true.
Lies, lies.
All true, all true. When you're a bride, and you've had a dream dress in your head since you saw your first Disney princess,
Oh, dear Lord.
all that stuff doesn't always matter. But my point is, it's the history and the cultural identity and the childhood fantasy that set our expectations and drive us to make those decisions. So here's the thing, the reality of marriage today and of the weddings and rituals attached to them is very different from what it has been historically up to a generation or two ago. So maybe there are a lot of expectations that actually just are not rooted in reality anymore. And I think we need to understand and examine that when we make decisions around what for many people is a once in a lifetime experience, like spending that kind of money on a dress.
And think about how you feel if it isn't your once in a lifetime experience and it becomes twice or thrice. Okay. All right. Go for it. Get into your rabbit hole. But I'm timing you. You've got 2 minutes, lady.
It's not fair. Fine. And let's be transparent. What I'm focusing on here is Western tradition because that's what I'm familiar with. And that's what still drives most of the industry in Canada. Okay. I could get into all this stuff about the rise of marriages based on free choice and love and nonsense, as my father would have said, which in Western culture began in the 18th century, solidified in the 19th century. But I won't, though notice how I snuck it in there. Let's just say
Of course.
that by the 20th century, marriage was about choosing your own partner, emotional compatibility, lifelong companionship, and personal happiness. And in a
Hmm.
nutshell, the weddings that mark them were about beginnings. They were about young couples starting out with few, if any, material possessions to set up a household. And that's what showers and wedding presents used to be about, providing practical things to launch a young couple's life together. But weddings themselves got a lot more elaborate, and they were driven by two things: Queen Victoria and the rise of consumer culture.
I didn't see that coming. Okay, you can have an extra minute. Now I'm intrigued. Really? Seriously?
Yeah. So brides all over the world today marry in white because an English queen did it in 1840. Before that, brides just wore their best clothes. Clothes were expensive. What you wore on your wedding was expected to be or become part of your wardrobe.
So, this is the first time in my life I appreciate being behind the times. That's what I heard from that. But wasn't white about chastity?
It was just what
No?
Queen Victoria wore.
Okay, why am I what man, I'm so confused now. Clearly everything is an urban legend because I always thought that white was meant that you were chaste before your marriage, and I already had a kid, right? The animals have left the barn. So I was definitely not going to wear white one way or the other. But okay, I stand corrected.
Remember that a lot of things happen and then meaning gets attached to them afterwards and then backdated. There's a word for it. I
Yeah,
was just reading about that. I forget what it is. But at any rate, that's
interesting.
where the
Huh.
tradition started with Queen Victoria. Okay. Same is true, for example, with the diamond engagement ring. We have the idea that diamonds engagement rings have been around forever. Nope.
I thought betrothal rings were an ancient custom. Am I misremembering that too?
No. Betrothal rings, yes. Diamonds, nope. In fact, colored stones were preferred or plain metal bands. But
Mhm.
diamonds, we know exactly when that started. New York, 1947. The diamond
Hmm.
market had collapsed, and De Beers launched one of the most famous advertising campaigns in history.
Diamond is forever,
Yep,
right?
yep. And was and is the most brilliant campaign. Think about it. It connects diamonds with eternal love, commitment, and romance, and with permanence, which discourages resale. Also, they built in this brilliant pricing strategy. Originally, the diamond should cost 1 month's salary. This went up to 2 months' salary in the 1980s, 3 months in some markets.
Yep, and that's why I did not get a diamond.
And
I'm
that's
not gonna
just
buy into this. Yeah.
Well, that's just one example of rising consumer culture.
Mhm.
Basically, then, after the Second World War, weddings got more and more elaborate until we ended up here we are today. Even though the people getting married are not the same people who were getting married even a generation or two ago. Because remember, I said weddings always used to be about beginnings?
Yeah,
Pretty much not true anymore. Weddings aren't about starting points. They're about generally celebrating established relationships.
because we aren't necessarily in arranged marriages anymore. And we're also getting married older at a different life stage, probably established in a career. Maybe we already even own a house or live together, or in my case, had a child already.
Exactly. Exactly. And think about this because the demographics bear this out very clearly. Over the last 70 years, Canadians have delayed first marriage by almost a decade. So the silent generation, that was the World War II generation, married in their early 20s. Boomers married in their mid 20s. Gen X married in their late 20s. And for your generation, millennials, it's now early 30s. It's too early to talk about Gen Z. The bleeding edge isn't 30 yet, but there's no reason to think they won't continue that pattern.
Longer education, more women pursuing careers, couples living together before marriage, later home ownership, student debt, affordability crisis, higher housing costs. Can you blame them?
It's also just a greater acceptance of staying single or living common law. So, culturally, what we're seeing is that marriage itself is becoming a choice. It's not an expectation. And that is new. You have to make a few assumptions to get apples to apples comparison, but according to Stats Can, the share of married Canadians between the ages of 25 and 39 has fallen hugely from 58% for boomers in 1991, 44% for Gen X in 2006, 35.3% for millennials in 2021.
It always amazes me how we tend to think the way things are right now is just the way it has always been. But on a population basis, that is a huge change in what is a very short amount of time.
It really is. And here's the thing, even though they are no longer about beginnings, the custom of the wedding continues and more elaborately than ever.
Ooh, rabbit hole to solid ground. I see what you did there. Nice.
I've been doing this for a long time. So I think we need to look at the psychology behind the shift, okay? Weddings, and I include my own wedding in this, used to basically follow a sort of family, friends, vows, cake, and done model. It was pretty straightforward. Now it is so much more elaborate. It honestly, it seems to me that now it's less about your intimate circle and more about public performance. It's not about starting out together, about possibility and the future. It's about celebrating a pretty mature relationship. And our expectations of how to do that get driven by media and social media, television, Pinterest, Instagram, TikTok, celebrity weddings. This stuff has nothing to do with our real lives and everything to do with what some of us come to expect. So the wedding isn't an event anymore, not even a capital E event. It's an entire production. So think about this, a comparable Canadian wedding today likely costs 2 to 3 times more in real purchasing power than the average wedding did in the mid 1970s. That's in constant dollars, no inflation. A nice middle class wedding in the 70s cost in today's dollars ten to $15,000. Compare that to the $30,000 to $40,000 your nice middle class wedding costs today. Today's wedding is not just more expensive because of inflation, it is 2 or 3 times more elaborate.
And we're also talking about things that probably didn't exist back then, right? You talk about the entire wedding business complex. And so you consider all the things that are, I would say, fairly new, right? Like the professional wedding planners, the multiple photographers and videographers, drone footage, elaborate
What the
floral installations, drone footage. It's a thing.
what the
Um,
Oh
Designer
god.
bridal gowns, custom decor, wedding websites. I've seen so many of those. Social media content creators. There are people who will curate that stuff for you. Late night food stations or food trucks, signature cocktails, destination bachelor and bachelorette trips, luxury transportation, or renting out Madison Square Gardens.
We'll all line up to do that. Okay, but really the forces behind that, I'd say there are two major forces behind that. One is the commercialization of weddings, that big wedding industry, like you were just talking about. And the second one, I think, is social media that has really raised expectations about
Mhm.
what a successful wedding looks like. Because it's all about making you look really successful, right?
Yeah, which is a losing battle in my opinion. But okay, I'd probably throw in a third one. It's the personalization trend, where it's not just competing on what a successful wedding looks like, but it's where couples expect their wedding to be unique and different and special snowflakey. You know what I mean?
I got to admit, I have mixed feelings about that. Personalization of vows is not particularly new. It was actually a big thing when I got married, too. And that was a very long time ago. But this quest for unique everything, it's like not just wedding as public performance, even, it's wedding as competition.
Oh, yeah, and it starts even way before the wedding. Have you ever seen the elaborate proposals everybody's done up? I'm like, "No, this is not a surprise. Okay, you do not look like that when I see you Tuesdays. So, something's different." Anyways, I think this is the point where you gotta ask why, right? Especially when it's such a great expense. My observation is that weddings can become vehicles for identity, right? Couples curate it the way they curate their lives on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But this time with a very real world price tag. And you've mentioned the difference in cost in just a couple of years, right? But personalizing everything from vows to venues, food to music, even ceremonies and cultural traditions. And the costs have been driven way beyond what previous generations considered normal. Now, personally, I don't have an issue with elaborate weddings, but not if you can't afford it. I think this is really a continuation of the same questions we were asking in last week's travel episode. Why? And for whom? A wedding ultimately should be about two people coming together and making vows in front of their community. It shouldn't be about showboating. It's like what you always say, impressing people you don't care about. I really think all the customs need to get challenged.
Makes so much sense to me. But a lot of people have parental and cultural expectations to live up to as well.
Not when you're paying for it yourself. I think you have to challenge it. Why would you spend 30 to 40,000 on a wedding if you're saving for or maybe have just bought a home and then complain about the price of houses? Or you host fundraisers for weddings and then still ask for gifts? I'm sorry. It's tacky. Or your parents have to foot the bill and maybe dip into their own welfare to fund weddings, then homes, then children, whatever. It's a lot. And I think a lot of it is super unnecessary.
Yeah. I guess the thing is, despite all of this change, there is still one thing we do need to hold on to, and that is the idea of marriage and weddings being about commitment. As you said, that's that simple thing of two people making that commitment. They still bring families together, friends together. They create shared memories, rituals. And even for couples who've already built a life together, there's still a rite of passage that is signaling to their community that this relationship is in a new phase.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
I may have alluded to this earlier, but not all marriages succeed, right? Demographers estimate that 35% to 40% of first marriages eventually end in divorce.
Huh, I thought it was half.
Me too, but I looked at it and it's half of all marriages, but it's the divorce rate of, unfortunately, second or subsequent marriages that drives up the average. So 50 to 60% will end in divorce for second marriages. And if you get married more, sorry to tell you this, but now you're looking at a divorce rate of 70 to 75% for third marriages plus.
Dr. Johnson, the triumph of hope over experience.
Who?
Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, author, critic. He created the first really influential dictionary of the English language and a gazillion famous quips and quotes. My personal favorite. My congratulations to you, sir. Your manuscript is both good and original, but the part that is good is not original, and the part that is original is not good.
Oh, that, Dr. Johnson. How could I have ever forgotten that? Yeah, 50% of all marriages. Only a small minority have marriage contracts, aka prenuptial agreements or prenups, as we like to shorten it, and as they are known south of the border. Now, StatsCan doesn't track, but best estimate is about 5 to 10% of Canadian marriages have them, with higher rates among people who are older, remarrying, or own businesses, have children from previous relationships, or expect inheritances or own property. And that compares to about 15% in the US. Because obviously, when you start having more assets, it's way more important that when you get married, you're very clear on that, or if you have dependents. Oh, here's my full circle moment. Now, everyone online is talking about Friday's wedding between Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, not Kels, just so I repeat it. Doretta, you learned something. And now, beyond all the AI slop, there's so much of it online, everyone wants to get an insider view. Well, I read, and to be fair, this could also be fake news, that they have a 40-page prenup. That's what we should be talking about, people. I actually don't care about the dress. Knowing her, it was probably whimsy and garden themed and white. I like Taylor's earlier music that spoke on wedding dreams. Anyway, the prenup is what I want details on. You need a marriage contract, people. I know it's not romantic, but it's really, 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 really important. And if anything, listen to Tay Tay. She knows what's up because this is what's critical. This is what's going to protect you, and especially as someone as successful as she is and all the work that she's done to build herself up before marriage. So I think I want to dedicate a whole episode on it, and maybe by next week, more details of the wedding will be released. Although, is it AI or not? Who can really tell anymore? Which is why we're going to do a deep dive on marriage contracts next week. Stay tuned.
On that note, 3 key learnings for today.
Okay. First, wedding expenses have gotten crazy out of line compared with past generations and what they spent on their own weddings. And we've done that to ourselves. We need to take a closer look at our wedding expectations and challenge the extent to which they've been driven by huge marketing campaigns and dream machines that drive unrealistic wedding expectations.
Okay. Second, we're living in a period during which there are enormous social and cultural transitions that affect both marriages and weddings. And a lot of the expenses of today's weddings are actually rooted in shallow traditions that could do with some serious questioning.
Finally, you need a marriage contract, also known as a prenup south of the border. It's not about romance, it's about protection. Look at the stats, right? There's going to be a handful of us that will not be married in the future. And we're going to devote an entire episode to it next week. Exciting.
That's us for today. What are your thoughts on weddings? If you'd like to share, why not drop us a line or 10 at notjustmoneypodcast at gmail.com.
Good talk. You've been listening to Not Just Money with Doretta and Li. Click on the show's description for links to resources related to today's conversation. Our aim is to share sources that provide objective information that can help you make informed financial decisions. Please rate and review our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to be featured on the show, you can send us your questions and comments by a written email, audio file, or video file. Please include your name and city. This show is produced and edited by Li, with original music by Leo Zhang cello and artwork by John Tu. Now for some legalese. Please note that the views expressed by our hosts and guests are theirs alone and should not be viewed as financial advice. This podcast is intended to be entertainment and educational in nature. Please seek additional professional support or information before acting on any podcast information. As always, good talk.